sure hope you're there.
I'm
Take
here.
it away. Okay,
Dana, good to see you guys. Nice show. This is the first handoff. I like it. First of many.
Right. We can't see you.
Well done.
Where are you, Brett?
I'm right here. We'll
was a
take
fumble.
over. Thank you, guys. So the first charges are in as the special counsel announces his first indictments and a guilty plea in the investigation into Russian collusion during the 2016 election. Where does it all go from here? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. 5 months after he was first appointed, special counsel Robert Mueller revealed his team's first guilty plea related to the Russia investigation. This as two former Trump campaign officials pled not guilty today to a dozen counts, including conspiracy against the United States. One of those two men is Paul Manafort, the president's former campaign manager, and certainly one of the biggest names to be facing criminal charges. But it's another, less recognizable name that could potentially pose a bigger problem for the president and his people. We have Fox team coverage. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts looks at the reaction coming out of the Oval Office today and the White House. Senior political analyst Brit Hume with the political implications and analysis. But we begin with Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen outside District Court. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. This is already being described by some media outlets as the worst day yet for the Trump presidency. But in all the action here in federal court today, Donald Trump was far removed from the allegations and confessions that represent the first landmark in the special counsel's investigation.
Any reaction, Mr. Manafort?
A few hours after former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort surrendered to the FBI, he and longtime associate Rick Gates appeared before Magistrate Judge Deborah Robinson in federal district court, where each pleaded not guilty to 12 counts of financial crimes in an indictment unsealed by the Office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The indictment alleged that while lobbying for Ukrainian interests from 2006 through 2015, Manafort and Gates laundered $75 million through offshore companies and bank accounts, and allegedly took steps as late as February to continue concealing millions in unreported income.
That President Donald Trump was correct. There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort or the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government. The second thing about this indictment that I myself find most ridiculous is a claim that maintaining offshore accounts to bring all your funds into the United States as a scheme to conceal from the United States government is ridiculous.
Manafort was released on $10 million bond, Gates $5 million, due for payment if they fail to appear for court proceedings or leave their homes for any reason other than legal or medical appointments or religious worship. Analysts noted that the charges are unrelated to the Russia collusion angle that Mueller's team was originally established to investigate.
What the special prosecutor is likely doing here is putting pressure on someone he knows was at the center or feels like was at the center of this relationship with Russia, and use criminal charges as a way of trying to get cooperation from Manafort.
Mueller also unsealed a guilty plea entered over 3 weeks ago by George Papadopoulos, a former foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. Questioned by FBI agents 1 week after the inauguration, Papadopoulos lied about the timing and circumstances under which he made contact with various foreign nationals last year, people he believed to be well connected inside the Kremlin.
He was a relatively junior official, so again, how much closer it brings it to the White House depends on what actually happened.
Papadopoulos signed a summary of events that stated the professor told defendant Papadopoulos, as defendant Papadopoulos later described to the FBI, that they, meaning the Russians, have dirt on her, meaning Hillary Clinton. The Russians had emails of Clinton. They have thousands of emails. However, the documents indicate the Trump campaign rebuffed this effort by the Russians, working through Papadopoulos to set up a meeting with the candidate himself. An unnamed senior campaign official was quoted in the summary as having emailed a colleague, "We need someone to communicate that DT, meaning Donald Trump, is not doing these trips."
The president, it's in his best interest, in my view, to ensure that Mueller can wrap this investigation up quickly. The more this gets dragged out, the more you see people connected to the campaign being brought in for questioning under oath.
I spoke this morning with someone who spoke to Paul Manafort on the phone twice on Saturday, and as late as Saturday evening, Manafort didn't believe he was going to be indicted. As for his business associate, Rick Gates, he was represented at the arraignment today by a public defender because, according to Gates' attorney, he didn't receive enough advance warning about his indictment to appear with his own attorney. Brett?
James Rosen outside the courthouse. James, thank you. President Trump remained defiant today, if only on Twitter, reasserting there was no collusion with Russia and that the feds should instead focus their investigation on Democrats. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us from the North Lawn with that part of the story. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. From the very beginning, President Trump has insisted that his campaign did not collude with Russia to try to influence the outcome of the U.S. election. If there was collusion, any evidence of that or even an allegation of it has yet to be revealed by the special counsel. President Trump pushed back hard against any notion that the Manafort-Gates indictment had any trail to him or his campaign, tweeting this morning, quote, "Sorry, but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. But why aren't crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus? Also, there is no collusion." In the daily briefing, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders not only sought to distance the White House from Manafort, but also downplayed his role, ignoring the fact he was campaign chairman for 3 months.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity. Paul Manafort was brought in to lead the delegate process, which he did, and was dismissed not too long after that.
The Democratic leader.
On Capitol Hill, Democrats wasted no time in playing connect the dots.
What we know now is that an alleged unregistered foreign agent was given the chairmanship of a campaign for the presidency of the United States, and with it, untold influence on a future president and his party.
The White House was also aggressively distancing itself from George Papadopoulos, who served as an unpaid volunteer in the president's Foreign Policy Council and attended at least one meeting with then-candidate Donald Trump and Senator Jeff Sessions. The press secretary insisted Papadopoulos was doing no outreach to Russia at the campaign's request.
Can you explain what happened with his outreach?
He reached out and nothing happened beyond that, which I think shows, one, his level of importance in the campaign, and two, shows what little role he had within coordinating anything officially for the campaign.
Sources tell Fox News that Trump campaign officials were perplexed by Papadopoulos' outreach to Russia, that he had been hired for his expertise on Greece. Sources familiar with the president's legal team say the White House is unconcerned by the guilty plea. It was evidence provided by the White House, they say, emails that led to Papadopoulos' prosecution. Still, the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee fired a sharp warning shot across the president's bow today. In a statement, Mark Warner saying issuing pardons to any of his associates or to himself would be unacceptable and result in immediate bipartisan action by Congress. The White House today did not rule out the possibility that the president could, at some point, possibly pardon one or more of the defendants in this case. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, though, saying it's far too early to make such a determination and that things need to play out before they even begin to talk about that. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. For more analysis on today's developments, we turn to senior political analyst Bret Hume. Good evening, Bret. Your thoughts?
Hi, Brett. Well, it's not a good day when your former campaign chairman, former campaign manager, is indicted on federal charges. However, the good news for the Trump team and for the president himself is that there's no indication that these charges have anything really to do with the Trump campaign. The Papadopoulos matter would seem to be more serious, since this was about what he did while apparently an advisor of some stripe to the Trump campaign. But it does appear from what's in the charges and what else has been reported about Papadopoulos and his attempts to establish communications between the Trump campaign and Russian officials is that they didn't really go anywhere. Now, maybe there's more to know about this. Maybe more will come out. But, from considering what were obviously the expectations of many in Washington, particularly those who were hoping that something would happen that would be devastating to the White House, that may yet come, but this wasn't it.
Right. You know, you've covered these kinds of investigations before where prosecutors go after someone and then ideally turn that person or use them. In this case with Papadopoulos, he was arrested in July and then just pled guilty in October. In the motion to seal all of the information around the arrest. It says this: premature disclosure of the fact of the defendant's arrest and the nature of the charges against him likely to be substantially prejudiced both the defendant and the government. Defendant has indicated that he's willing to cooperate with the government in its ongoing investigation into Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Public disclosure of the defendant's initial appearance, however, would significantly undermine his ability to serve as a proactive cooperator. Those two words at the end there, Britt, proactive cooperator, previously have meant as much as that person possibly wearing a wire in the investigation as it continues.
Well, Brett, I think that's all possibly true, but it's in the realm of speculation at the moment. And if we're kind of going on what we know now, and what happened today and what came out today, it would not appear to do any particularly serious damage. Now, more of that may come. I would also note today that we had this sudden and unexpected resignation of
Tony Podesta,
the head of the Podesta Group, who is John Podesta's brother from his lobbying firm, which we know from reporting by Tucker Carlson of our network and others, was working closely with Manafort during some of this period in question. So, you know, there may be more to come on that as well, and it bears watching. It's the resignation by itself. You know, it could have been for health reasons, for all we know, but it was sudden and unexpected, which makes you think that this is something to watch.
Yeah, Britt, as always, thank you. Is this the beginning or the end of the Mueller investigation? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaierSR. At this hour, the Secretaries of State and Defense are testifying before a Senate panel about the president's power to fight terrorism around the globe and efforts by Congress to weigh in. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is monitoring the hearing on the authorization for the use of military force, the AUMF. Joins us live with details. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. Now some lawmakers are saying is the time for a serious conversation about Congress's role in authorizing the use of military force with the nation facing serious threats. But top Trump administration officials say they do not need a new authorization.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Secretary of Defense James Mattis back on Capitol Hill for a late afternoon hearing before the Foreign Relations Committee.
Though a statement of continued congressional support would be welcome, a new AUMF is not legally required to address the continuing threat posed by al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS.
With some lawmakers saying the authorization for the use of military force, or AUMF, crafted in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, now being used in places like Niger, is dated.
I feel strongly that 16 years after the Congress authorized the 2001 so-called AUMF, our declaration of war against those based in Afghanistan who attacked New York and the United States on 9/11, that we have gone far afield from the scope of that initial authorization.
Virginia Democrat Senator Tim Kaine has been among those calling for lawmakers to do something about a state of war on, quote, autopilot.
It's time for Congress to finally revisit the authorization, which is badly out of date, and have a debate in full view of the American public.
A senior State Department official told Fox Tillerson would say if Congress wants to pursue a new AUMF, the Trump administration would want it to include no time constraints and no geographic restraints. The official noting that since ISIS strongholds are collapsing, ISIS fighters are moving. And since 9/11, the threats have morphed from al-Qaeda and the Taliban to ISIS and other affiliates or inspired groups.
I am concerned about the spread of ISIS throughout Africa. And that's going on, and that's part of it. And unfortunately, the threat is growing.
South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says Congress must be informed and has the power of the purse, but should not prevent others from doing their jobs.
Congress is not set up to be military commanders. 535 members of Congress don't sit down and designate what threats the nation faces.
The concern for the Trump administration is anything that ties the hands of the commander-in-chief. But Arizona Senator Jeff Flake noted just moments ago, not one member of the Foreign Relations panel was here 16 years ago, and suggests it's time for them to get on the record. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. A federal court is barring President Trump from changing the government's policy on transgenders in the military. President Trump announced in August he intended to reverse course on a 2016 policy that allowed troops to serve openly as transgender individuals. In making the ruling, the district judge said that transgender members of the military who had sued over the change were likely to win their lawsuit. Tonight, the U.S. Navy is investigating whether 2 SEAL team members took the life of a Green Beret in Mali. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin joins me live from the Pentagon with details in this case. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. 2 members of the Navy's elite SEAL Team 6 are being investigated by the Navy's Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, in the death of an Army Special Forces soldier found strangled in Mali back in June. The 2 SEALs were flown out of the West African country almost immediately and placed on administrative leave. A military medical examiner ruled homicide by asphyxiation killed 34-year-old Staff Sergeant Logan Melgar. In other words, somebody strangled him. Sergeant Melgar, a native of Lubbock, Texas, was assigned to the 3rd Special Forces Group, the same unit which lost 4 soldiers during an attack in Niger earlier this month. A veteran who had joined the Army in 2012 after graduating from Texas Tech University, he had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Foul play was immediately suspected in Melgar's death, according to the New York Times, which first reported the investigation. His body was found unresponsive in U.S. Embassy housing on June 4th. The mission of the Green Berets and SEAL Team 6 are highly classified. SEAL Team 6 is one of the world's premier counterterrorism forces, part of the Pentagon's Joint Special Operations Command. It's the elite counter-terror unit, of course, responsible for killing Osama bin Laden back in 2011. NCIS confirmed to Fox News it has opened an investigation, Brett, but refused to offer more details. Brett?
And Jennifer, we're getting reports tonight of a new development in the Benghazi investigation. What can you tell us about that?
Officials tell me U.S. Special Operations Forces captured a 46-year-old militant alleged to have been involved in the deadly attacks on the U.S. diplomatic compound and CIA complex in Benghazi in 2012. U.S. commandos captured Mustafa al-Imam in Libya and are transporting him back to the United States, not to Guantanamo Bay. The Justice Department charged the suspect in a sealed indictment in 2015. The snatch and grab operation was approved by President Donald Trump. We're told the suspect had been observed by U.S. forces as far back as December 2012, Brett, but U.S. commandos had twice been told not to grab him, according to U.S. forces on the ground then. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. More on those indictments and that guilty plea coming up at the panel. Next, the corruption trial of a Democratic senator nears a close, and later a renewed protest among NFL players. What made most of the teams take a knee Sunday?